That morning, my future sister-in-law dropped my handwritten recipe card into the kitchen trash. She didn't even bother lowering her voice. "We're not using old family recipes," she said, brushing flour off her designer apron. "This wedding deserves something modern." The room went quiet. My mother looked down at the counter. My brother pretended to check his phone. I reached into the trash, unfolded the stained recipe card my grandmother had written 52 years earlier, and slipped it back into my purse. "I understand," I said. She smiled politely, as if she'd just solved a problem. Then she added the sentence that stayed with me for the next 2 years. "Some traditions are better left in the past." I nodded once. What she didn't know was that my grandmother's recipe had never been just a family dessert. 3 months earlier, I'd quietly filed paperwork to turn it into a business. And less than 2 years later, while she proudly stocked her boutique bakery with trendy imported desserts, she would walk into a grocery store and find my product displayed in every checkout aisle. By then it would be far too late to ask for the recipe back. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 33 years old and I live in Madison, Wisconsin, where I worked as a food scientist for a regional dairy company. Most people assumed I spent my days tasting yogurt and ice cream. The truth was far less glamorous. I spent most of my time measuring moisture levels, testing shelf stability, and figuring out how to make fresh food last longer without sacrificing quality. It was an exciting conversation at parties, but I loved it, especially because every experiment reminded me of my grandmother, Eleanor. Grandma never measured anything with fancy equipment. She baked by instinct. She'd taste batter with the tip of a spoon and somehow know it needed another pinch of cinnamon or a splash of vanilla. When I was 8, she gave me my own recipe notebook. "Recipes are stories," she'd whisper. "If you stop making them, the stories disappear." Every Sunday after church, we'd bake together. Apple butter bars, honey oat cookies, spice caramel crisps. But one recipe stood above all the others. Her maple oat butter bites. Small soft squares wrapped in wax paper that somehow tasted homemade even 3 days later. Neighbors requested them every Christmas. Teachers begged for them during school fundraisers. Grandma always smiled and refused payment. "They're gifts," she'd say. After she passed away, I inherited the little notebook filled with handwritten recipes. Most were wonderful. Only one had a tiny note written across the top. "For Claire. Improve it. Don't protect it. Grow it." Asterisk asterisk. At first I thought she meant improve the baking. Years later I realized she meant something much bigger. My older brother Ethan never cared much about baking. He became a financial advisor while I buried myself in food science. We stayed close despite our different interests. When he got engaged to Olivia Parker, I honestly wanted us to become friends. Olivia was 31, ambitious, stylish, and incredibly talented at branding. She had built a successful boutique bakery specializing in luxury wedding desserts. Her cakes were beautiful. Magazine beautiful. She cared deeply about presentation. Sometimes maybe too deeply. The first time she visited my apartment, she noticed Grandma's notebook on the kitchen counter. "You actually cook from handwritten recipes?" I smiled. "Mostly bake." She flipped through a few pages. "They're charming." I thanked her. Then she added, "You should digitize them before they disappear." It sounded helpful. Looking back, I think that was the first sign we valued recipes very differently. To Olivia, they were content. To me, they were family. 3 months before the wedding, Mom suggested including Grandma's maple oat butter bites on the dessert table. Everyone loved the idea. Everyone except Olivia. I already finalized the menu. Mom smiled gently. "We could add just one family dessert." Olivia shook her head. "My bakery has a brand." Nobody argued. Not even me. I didn't want dessert to become family drama. A week later, Mom quietly asked if I'd bake a small batch anyway for the rehearsal dinner. Just for family. I happily agreed. When Olivia heard about it, she insisted we all bake together. "It'll be fun." That's how I found myself standing in my mother's kitchen the morning everything changed. I carefully placed Grandma's worn recipe card beside the mixing bowl. Olivia glanced at it once. "Is that the recipe?" "Yes." She picked it up. "Read maybe 3 lines. Then smiled. "We won't need this." Before I understood what she meant, she tossed it into the trash. Not angrily. Casually, like throwing away junk mail. The room froze. Mom looked horrified. Ethan. My brother opened his mouth, then closed it again. I quietly retrieved the recipe card from the trash. A little flower had stuck to the corner. Nothing else. I'll just take this home. Olivia laughed awkwardly. I wasn't trying to offend you. I know. I just think recipes evolve. They do. I've already created something much better. I looked at the spotless marble countertops surrounding us, then at the handwritten note from Grandma tucked safely back inside my purse. I smiled politely. I hope everyone loves it. They did. Her dessert table was beautiful, perfectly decorated, professionally photographed. Guests complimented every single display. But throughout the reception, relatives kept asking my mother the same question. Where are Eleanor's maple bites? Mom simply smiled. We decided not to make them. Several older relatives looked genuinely disappointed. I noticed Olivia overhearing those conversations. She pretended not to care. But I could tell she did. After the wedding, life settled down again. Or at least it looked that way. Because while everyone else moved on, I couldn't stop thinking about Grandma's note. Improve it. Don't protect it. Grow it. ****. One evening after work, I opened my food science lab notebook beside Grandma's recipe book. What if she hadn't meant keeping the recipe inside the family? What if she'd meant sharing it with everyone? For the next 6 months, my apartment kitchen became a testing lab. I adjusted moisture, changed packaging, experimented with natural preservatives, reduced sugar without losing texture. My coworkers volunteered as taste testers. By the 42nd batch, something remarkable happened. The maple oat butter bites still tasted freshly baked after nearly 3 weeks. That had never happened before. I wasn't just preserving Grandma's recipe. I was fulfilling her last instruction. Then one afternoon, my department manager tasted a sample. Claire. What? You know this isn't just a family recipe anymore. I laughed. It never was. No. He took another bite. This is a product. That evening I filed paperwork to create a small food company called Eleanor's Kitchen. I never mentioned it to anyone outside my closest friends. Not even Ethan. Not because it was secret. Because I wanted to know if the recipe could succeed on its own. Without family expectations. Without sympathy. Without Grandma's story carrying it. 3 months later, I received an email from a regional grocery distributor asking for a meeting. I read it 3 times before believing it was real. And before I could even decide how to respond, another message appeared. This one was from Olivia. Can I stop by tomorrow? I want to ask you something about Grandma's recipe. ****. I stared at Olivia's message for nearly a minute. It had been almost 8 months since the wedding. In all that time, she had never mentioned Grandma's recipe again. Not once. Now suddenly she wanted to talk. I replied with one sentence. Tomorrow works. Around 6. ****. She answered almost immediately. Perfect. Thanks. ****. That surprised me. Olivia wasn't usually that quick to respond unless something mattered to her. The next evening she arrived carrying a small white bakery box. I brought lemon tarts. You didn't have to. I know. She looked unusually nervous. Not defensive. Not confident. Just uncomfortable. I invited her inside. After a few minutes of awkward small talk, she finally looked toward Grandma's recipe notebook sitting on my kitchen counter. I owe you an apology. I hadn't expected those words. For what? For the wedding. I stayed quiet. She sighed. I shouldn't have thrown away the recipe card. No. I thought I was protecting my brand. I understand. She looked relieved that I hadn't argued. Then she asked the question she'd obviously come to ask. Could I have the recipe? The room became very quiet. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I poured us both coffee. Finally, I asked, why? She hesitated. My customers keep asking for traditional recipes. You already have dozens. They want something authentic. I looked at her carefully. You mean they want Grandma's? She nodded. I think so. There wasn't anything dishonest about her answer. At least not yet. I can't give it to you. Her shoulders dropped. I figured. It's not because I'm angry. Then why? I smiled gently. Because it isn't just a recipe anymore. She frowned. I don't understand. I'll explain when I can. She looked disappointed. But she didn't argue. She simply thanked me for the coffee and left. I felt bad. Not because I'd refused. Because I couldn't yet tell her the truth. The following Monday, I met with representatives from Great Lakes Grocery Distribution. I'd expected one buyer. Instead, 5 people walked into the conference room. There were samples of my maple oat butter bites arranged neatly on the table. A woman named Denise Harper introduced herself. We've tested your product in 6 pilot stores. I blinked. You already did? She smiled. We bought every package. My heart skipped. What was the response? She opened a report. 94% repurchase intent. I wasn't sure I'd heard correctly. 94. She nodded. And customers consistently use the same word. What word? Homemade. I smiled before I even realized I was smiling. That was exactly what Grandma had always wanted people to feel. Denise continued. We're interested in a regional launch. I tried to stay calm. How many stores? 118. I nearly dropped my pen. A year earlier I'd been baking in my apartment kitchen. Now someone was talking about more than 100 grocery stores. We'd need manufacturing capacity. We can help with that. We'd need packaging. Our design team can work with yours. And shelf life validation. She laughed. We know you're a food scientist. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe this might actually happen. There was only one condition. We won't change the recipe. Denise looked surprised. We normally recommend adjustments. This recipe stays exactly as it is. She studied me for a moment. That's not a business decision. No. It's a promise. She smiled. We can work with that. Over the next 6 months, my life changed completely. I left my corporate job, leased a small commercial kitchen, hired 3 employees, then 7, then 12. Every package carried a simple sentence beneath the logo. Inspired by Claire Bennett's kitchen. No exaggerated marketing. No fake family stories. Just the truth. Meanwhile, Ethan occasionally mentioned that Olivia seemed frustrated. Business has slowed. I'm sorry to hear that. People are buying packaged desserts more often. I nodded. The entire bakery industry had been changing. It wasn't just her. Still, I noticed something strange. Every few weeks, Olivia texted me another question. What kind of maple do you use? How do you keep them soft? Do you chill the dough overnight? Each time I politely declined to answer. Not because I wanted to keep secrets. Because those weren't the questions that made Grandma's recipe special. The real work had happened after the recipe. Years of food science. Hundreds of experiments. Countless failures. Then something unexpected happened. Rachel, one of my production supervisors, walked into my office holding a bakery box. You should see this. Inside were maple oat squares. At first glance, they looked remarkably similar to mine. I took one bite. Then another. They're not ours. No. But they're trying. The flavor was close. Very close. Too close. I looked at the bakery label. Parker Artisan Bakery. Olivia's shop. I wasn't angry. Recipes inspire people all the time. No one owns maple oats or butter. But something bothered me. The packaging. Across the front it read, "A cherished family recipe perfected for today." I quietly set the box down. That sentence didn't feel honest. That evening Ethan called. You and Olivia need to talk. Why? She's upset. About what? She thinks you're copying her. I almost laughed. Seriously. Claire. I'm not laughing at you. I know. She doesn't know about your business? No. You never told anyone. I wanted the products to speak for themselves. There was a long silence. Then Ethan said something that made me uneasy. She's pitching to grocery chains next month. I froze. Which chains? He named 3. The first one was Great Lakes Grocery, the same distributor preparing my launch. The following week, Denise called me unexpectedly. We had another bakery visit today. Oh, they presented a maple oat dessert. I already knew. What did you think? She laughed softly. I think they were about 6 months too late. I smiled. Was it that obvious? Our buyers had already approved yours. She paused. But something else happened. What? The bakery owner claimed she developed the concept independently. My smile faded. Denise continued. We didn't argue. Why not? Because your product enters distribution in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. After nearly 2 years of work, it was finally happening. I thanked her and hung up. That evening, I drove past one of the grocery stores scheduled for the first delivery. Workers were already rearranging shelves for new products. I sat in my car for several minutes, imagining Grandma seeing her recipe on those shelves. Not as a forgotten family tradition, but as something families across the country could take home. Then my phone rang. It was Ethan. His voice sounded strained. Claire. What happened? Olivia just got home from a buyer meeting. And she says someone beat her to the launch. I looked through the grocery store window as an employee rolled out a cart stacked with unopened display boxes labeled Eleanor's Kitchen. Before I could answer Ethan, he quietly added, She has no idea the company is yours. I didn't tell Ethan. Not because I wanted to embarrass Olivia. Because the product launch hadn't even happened yet. Until the first shipment reached customers, anything could still go wrong. I hope her next meeting goes better, I said. Ethan sighed. So do I. We ended the call. I sat in my car for another minute, staring at the unopened display cartons through the grocery store window. Grandma had written one sentence in the margin of that recipe nearly 20 years earlier. Improve it. Don't protect it. Grow it. Asterisk asterisk. In a few days I would finally understand what she meant. Launch morning didn't feel glamorous. There were no television cameras. No giant ribbon cutting. At 6:30 in the morning, I was standing inside store number 1 with Denise Harper and the department manager while employees filled the shelves. One by one the boxes were opened. Rows of cream-colored packages appeared. Each carried a small watercolor illustration of Grandma's old mixing bowl. Nothing flashy. Just warm. Honest. Exactly the way she'd baked. Denise handed me the first package off the shelf. You should keep this. I smiled. I'm not opening it. No. It's for my mom. By noon, social media had already started doing what marketing budgets couldn't. Customers posted photos. Parents packed them into school lunches. One woman wrote, asterisk, these taste like something my grandmother used to make. Asterisk. I screenshotted that review immediately. It mattered more than sales numbers. 3 days later, Great Lakes Grocery sent its first sales report. I stared at the spreadsheet in disbelief. The product had sold through nearly 70% of its initial inventory. Denise called before I even finished reading it. We need another production run. Already. We underestimated demand. I laughed. I've been praying for that problem. So have we. Production doubled within 2 weeks. Then doubled again. We hired another shift. Leased additional equipment. Every decision felt terrifying. Every order felt bigger than the last. One afternoon Rachel walked into my office holding another report. You should probably see this. What is it? Competitive analysis. I skimmed the first page. Most brands weren't changing prices. One bakery, however, had suddenly started discounting almost everything. Parker Artisan Bakery. Olivia. My stomach tightened. That evening Mom called. Can you come by tomorrow? Of course. I'd rather explain in person. The next afternoon I found Ethan and Olivia already sitting at the kitchen table. Neither looked happy. Mom placed coffee in front of everyone before quietly leaving us alone. Olivia broke the silence first. My biggest grocery account canceled. I nodded sympathetically. I'm sorry. They replaced my products. She pushed a brochure across the table. My brochure. Eleanor's Kitchen. She had highlighted the logo. You know this company? I looked down at the paper, then back at her. Yes. How? I took a slow breath. I own it. The room became completely silent. Ethan stared at me. What? I started it almost 2 years ago. You never told us. I wasn't hiding it. I was building it. Olivia looked completely stunned. The maple bites are mine. She shook her head. No. They're Grandma's. Yes. And Grandma left them to me. For several seconds nobody spoke. Finally Ethan asked quietly, when did all this happen? After your wedding. You left your job? Last year. You have employees? 23. His eyes widened. I had no idea. I know. Olivia looked down at the brochure again. I pitched almost the same product to Great Lakes. I heard. You already had a contract. Months earlier. She closed her eyes. I thought someone copied me. I answered honestly. I never even knew you were making your version until someone brought me a sample. She looked embarrassed. I thought. I know. Then she asked the question I had expected for months. Why didn't you tell me? I thought carefully before answering. Because I wanted the business to succeed because customers loved it. Not because people knew my family. She slowly nodded. That seemed to make sense to her. But something still bothered her. I still don't understand why you wouldn't give me the recipe. I reached into my purse. For the first time since the wedding, I placed Grandma's notebook on the table. I opened to the familiar page, then turned it toward her. At the top in faded blue ink were Grandma's handwritten words. For Claire. Improve it. Don't protect it. Grow it. Asterisk asterisk. Olivia read the sentence twice, then looked at me. You thought that meant. I thought Grandma wanted me to build something. And you did. It took hundreds of experiments. I smiled gently. The handwritten recipe is only 3 pages. The work behind the final product filled 19 laboratory notebooks. Ethan quietly flipped through the notebook. I always thought this was just baking. It started that way. It became food science, shelf life studies, ingredient stability, moisture migration, packaging tests, commercial scaling. Everything Grandma never had the chance to do herself. Olivia looked thoughtful. So even if I'd had the recipe, you wouldn't have had the product. I wasn't trying to insult her. Just explain the truth. Recipes are beginnings. Businesses are years of decisions. A week later, something happened that surprised me. Olivia asked if she could visit my production kitchen. Not to criticize. Not to compete. Simply to learn. I agreed. She walked slowly through the facility watching employees mix dough, package products and inspect every batch. Finally she laughed quietly. I was jealous of a recipe. I smiled. You were. It wasn't the recipe at all. No. It was everything you built around it. She nodded. I think I understand now. I thought that was the end of the conversation. It wasn't. As we reached the packaging line, one of my employees hurried toward me holding a shipping manifest. Claire. What is it? He looked both excited and nervous. We just received the purchase order. From who? He handed me the paperwork. My eyes immediately found the customer name. It wasn't another grocery chain. It wasn't an online retailer. It was the largest warehouse club in the Midwest. The order quantity was nearly 4 times bigger than every order we'd ever filled combined. And the requested delivery date was only 5 weeks away. I read the purchase order 3 times before I finally believed the number. Rachel looked over my shoulder. Is that real? I think so. She laughed nervously. If it is, we need another production line. She wasn't exaggerating. The warehouse club wanted enough product to stock more than 400 locations across 5 states. It was the kind of opportunity that could transform a regional company into a national brand. Or overwhelm it completely. The next 48 hours were a blur. Meetings, equipment suppliers, packaging vendors, banks, logistics companies. Every conversation ended with the same question. Can you actually produce this much? I answered honestly every time. Not today. But we can. I'd learned something from Grandma. Never promise perfection. Promise effort. A week later, I stood in the production facility watching our newest mixing line being installed. The smell of maple, butter, cinnamon, and toasted oats filled the building. It reminded me of Sunday afternoons in Grandma Eleanor's kitchen. Only now, instead of one baking tray, hundreds of trays moved through the ovens every hour. Rachel smiled. You know what I love most? What? We still taste every first batch by hand. I laughed. Grandma would have insisted. Some traditions were worth keeping exactly as they were. The Warehouse Club launch exceeded every expectation. Within 2 months, Eleanor's kitchen products expanded beyond Wisconsin into Illinois, Minnesota, Iowa, and Michigan. Then another regional chain signed. Then another. Every new contract came because customers kept buying the products again. Not because of flashy advertising, but because they genuinely enjoyed them. The business grew steadily, one satisfied family at a time. One Saturday morning, Mom called. You should stop by. When I arrived, Ethan and Olivia were already there. Olivia handed me a small white bakery box. I made something. Inside were maple apple hand pies. They looked beautiful. I used my own recipe. She smiled. No family recipes. No copying. Just mine. I took a bite. The crust was flaky. The filling was balanced. The maple flavor was subtle instead of overwhelming. They're wonderful. She let out the breath she'd been holding. I almost didn't bring them. Why? I kept comparing myself to you. I shook my head. Don't. You built a business. And you've built a bakery people come to for celebrations. We're not competing. We're serving people in different ways. She smiled. I finally believed that. A few months later, Olivia announced something that made the whole family cheer. She was launching monthly baking workshops for children and grandparents. The classes weren't about perfect desserts. They were about making memories together. At the first workshop, I watched a little girl proudly hold up a lopsided pie while her grandfather laughed beside her. It reminded me so much of Grandma and me that I had to blink away tears. Olivia walked over. You know. What? I think I understand why you were so upset at the wedding. I looked at her. It wasn't because of the recipe. No. It was because I treated a family memory like it didn't matter. I nodded. That hurt more than anything. I'm sorry, Claire. This time there were no excuses. No explanations. Just an honest apology. I accepted it. Not because the past had changed. Because she had. On the second anniversary of the product launch, our company gathered to celebrate. Employees who had joined when it was only a small commercial kitchen stood beside people we'd hired as the business grew. There were now more than 80 of us. Before everyone ate, Rachel handed me a framed copy of Grandma's original recipe card. They had carefully restored the flour stains, the faded ink, and even the tiny crease from the day I pulled it out of the trash. At the bottom of the frame was a small engraved plaque. Every great business begins with someone who refuses to throw away what truly matters. I couldn't speak for several seconds. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I drove to Grandma Eleanor's grave with one unopened package of maple oat butter bites. I set it beside the flowers. I finally understood your note. The wind gently moved through the maple trees. I smiled. You never wanted me to hide your recipe. You wanted me to share your kindness with as many families as possible. For a long moment I simply stood there. Then I laughed softly. I think you'd still tell me they need just one more pinch of cinnamon. Today, whenever I walk through a grocery store, I still pause when I see Eleanor's kitchen on the shelf. Not because I'm proud of seeing my product in stores. Because I remember the day someone casually threw a handwritten recipe into the trash. If I'd focused only on the insult, I might have spent years trying to prove someone wrong. Instead, I chose to prove Grandma right. Her recipe didn't become successful because it stayed a family secret. It became successful because it grew into something that brought comfort to thousands of families around their own kitchen tables. And every time I see a parent tuck one of our little cream-colored packages into a shopping cart, I hear Grandma's voice again. Asterisk recipes are stories. Asterisk. She was right. The best stories aren't the ones we keep hidden. They're the ones we share.